Right-hand button? Instead of the left-hand button. Okay, right. Well, it's a false start on that one. So welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee being held on Thursday, the 26th of September 2024. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this information are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website, and the Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. For participants in the room, please use the microphones to speak. It reminds me to press the right-hand button. Please speak directly towards the microphone, otherwise your contributions may not be picked up on the live stream. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Only committee members present in the room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request that they use the raise hand feature within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they are called upon? So introducing the first formal item, apologies for absence. Have any apologies been received?
Yes, Chair, apologies have been received from Councillor Bartram, Hamblin and Oliver.
Thank you. And do we have any substitutions?
We do. We have Councillor Polly Andrews for Councillor Oliver and Councillor Ben Proctor for Councillor Bartram.
Great. Thanks very much, Polly and Ben. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Are there any interest to declare? Anybody? No. Thank you. The minutes of the last meeting. The minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of July are included in the agenda, pages 11 to 16. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? If I could have a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. Questions from members of the public. I'm delighted to say we've had a question this time. A question has been received from Ms. Sarah Melia, and the response has been published as a supplement to the agenda. Ms. Melia has the opportunity to submit a written supplemental question or join the meeting to ask that. Can I ask the clerk to confirm if a supplementary question is to be asked?
Yes, Chair, Ms Melia's submitted a written question for me to read out. So the question is, many thanks to the written response to my initial question. No support for either party is mentioned in the procedure document relating to this process. Neither is the request for confidentiality of parties involved. Will this be remedied in the documents in future?
Thank you, Ms Melia, for asking your questions, for following up on this issue and making such relevant comments. The standard position related to confidentiality is covered by the policy. Should it be felt appropriate, I'm sure that conversations will take place between relevant parties and common sense will prevail. It is difficult to cover off each and every situation that arises, but if the monitoring officer or committee consider at some point in time that amendments should be made to the guidance, then we will do so. Thank you very much. We have no questions from councillors. Item 7 is the annual review of the Council's information requests and complaints 2023-24. So this is the parallel with the Council's municipal year. Very important item, I think, that we make sure that people who have concerns about what's happening in the council have the opportunity to ask questions and get the information in a timely manner. So I'll pass over it. Tilly Page and Claire Jacobs, between the two of you, you're going to make this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm assuming you've all read the report, so I'm just going to run through the main points for information requests. In the municipal year, the council dealt with 834 freedom of information and 130 environmental information regulation requests. The response rate, so requests answered within a statutory 20 working days, was 98.6%, which exceeds the council's target of 95% compliance. And we benchmark well against other local authorities for these requests of a similar size and makeup. The number of FOI and EIR requests has fallen. We attribute this to the disclosure log. We're publishing all request responses, except for any which have been exempted because they contain personal data. We also deal with a lot of requests as business as usual. These are requests which are easily answerable. The information may have been published on the disclosure log or on our website, and that leads to a faster response for requesters and less work for service areas across the authority. 3 of these requests were referred to the Information Commissioner, and they upheld the Council's decision in all cases. We also dealt with 207 requests from individuals asking for their own personal data. This is known as SARS, and the response rate for that is 78%, which is below Council target. We also dealt with low-level data incidents. There were 260 reported during the period. 4 of those met the threshold for reporting to the ICO. In 3 of the cases, they are satisfied with how the Council dealt with those breaches, and 1 case, the decision is still pending. The fact the number of breaches is high is not necessarily a cause for concern. It reflects a high level of staff awareness due to mandatory training, processes in place for reporting such issues, and open culture around reporting things which have gone wrong. Learning from incidents does take place and is fed back and incorporated into further staff training and changes in processes and procedures across the authority. I'm going to hand over now to Tilly to talk through the complaints.
Thank you, Claire. So much like Claire, I'll just run through the report and go through the key areas. So last municipal year, we received 483 corporate complaints. This is a decrease from the 734 that we received the previous year. It could be suggested that following discussions with CLT, we looked at how we could resolve complaints by logging them as inquiries or service requests rather than complaints. So could we resolve things quicker for the complainant? So I think that's possibly the reason for the decrease. So on top of the 483 corporate complaints we received, we managed 158 service requests as well. On top of that, we also managed 102 statutory children's complaints. 55 of the complaints that we received into the local authority took their complaints to the Ombudsman. Of those 55, only 10 were investigated and only 8 were upheld. We complied with 100% of the recommendations that the Ombudsman made. So the Ombudsman will make recommendations to the local authority. We have a duty to make sure that we follow up on those within a given time frame. And we did that in 100% of the cases. We paid out a total of £250 last municipal year in compensation, which is a decrease from the 2,200 that we paid out the previous year. We receive between 30 and 50 corporate complaints every month. We don't see huge spikes or reasons for complaint, but that's the sort of number we would receive on average. The only thing that keeps coming up every year is April, we see an increase in complaints about the council tax, which is to be expected, and we can predict that. December, January time, we see an increase in complaints about bins. So if there's any change because of the holidays, any change in bin schedules, we do get complaints about that. And then in the autumn, when the weather changes, we get a lot of complaints about the roads and the flooding. But again, we can predict that. And that's that from me.
Thank you, Tilly. I think perhaps I'd start off just referencing on page 22, and the page numbers I'm referring to are the public pack rather than the page number of the report. So it's paragraph 22, and there are various charts there, and just making sure I've got the right page. Paragraph 22.
Page 21.
Thank you. Sorry about this. This is the reference to an increase in the number of children-related cases. I think it's 80%, and a reference to the needing to perhaps listen to the voice of the children better. So it strikes me that this report's perhaps been looked at, and that's been an issue which has been identified, and some actions are taking place to improve that area. Tilly, is that a right interpretation?
Yes, absolutely. And this was discussed at the Children's Scrutiny Committee as well. So there has been an increase in children's statutory complaints that we've received by the local authority. We do run a very effective advocacy service to ensure that the voice of the child is met when they are making complaints. So any child wanting to make a complaint about not necessarily children's services, anything to do with the local authority. The advocacy service is there to ensure that their voice is heard throughout the process and helps them to be supported and navigate what can be a complicated statutory process. The children's process has 3 different stages before they even reach the Ombudsman. So we have worked very hard with children's services to make sure that that service is up and running, and the voice of the child is at the centre of any complaint they want to make, and they really understand what the service are doing to improve, and what actions they might take away and any learning they might take away as a result of their complaint. I've said previously, I don't think the increase in children's complaints is a cause for concern. I can absolutely see why it might look like one. But I think, much like Claire was just saying with the information governance team, the complaints team have made the process much more accessible. There are multiple ways that you can make a complaint now. The team will also meet with families, with children, with anybody to take their complaint verbally, rather than expecting somebody to either email or send in a letter. So we've made it much more accessible. I know that the Chief Exec has spoken about it a lot. It has been in the media, and it was a recommendation that we should action that. We should make the process more accessible. So I think the increase, for me, is a good thing. It means that our families have some trust and faith in us, that we will look at their complaint, investigate it fairly and effectively, and we will provide some outcomes for them to hopefully resolve it for them.
And this is largely children actually making a complaint, or is this children accompanied in a way by a guardian or a parent or whatever?
Predominantly families are making the complaints on behalf of the children, but we have received complaints from children and young people. We always make sure that if we receive a complaint from a child or young person, that they are supported through the advocacy service. Because it's not something that was previously available to them, but it is available to them now. If a parent or a family member or foster carer perhaps is complaining on behalf of the child, we always make sure that the child knows about the complaint if they're age appropriate. So we generally say from age of 12 up that they can consent to the complaint being made, and we will try to give them the option of putting the complaint in themselves rather than the family doing it. The idea of the statutory process is it was originally designed for children to complain to the local authorities. So for us, we need to make sure that the person complaining to us about the service a child is receiving, they need to be able to actively advocate and replicate that child's voice effectively.
Yeah, great. I mean, it sounds to me as if you have a good relationship with the children's services, and the way you deal with them is something which it takes into account that directorate's perhaps wishes. Has anybody else got any questions? Robert, then Frank.
Yes, a couple. Do you have any data? I think it's Claire will be able to answer. Do you have any data that tells us how many of the freedom of information requests are for things which are already published, that are actually available, that people haven't been able to find? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, we do collect data of how many are already publicly available, and be able to provide you with that if that would be useful. Yes, I mean we are increasingly encouraging service areas to publish information on the website proactively, and more of them are doing that. So yeah, we're definitely seeing an increase moving towards that way, that the information is available without having to make a request for it.
Okay, because my concern, we discussed this earlier within our own private committee meeting, and my concern is I don't think the search engine in our council website is very good. In fact, it's awful. And so it might be helpful to consider whether we might look at improving that so that people can find the information more easily. If you follow the menus, it's usually not too bad, but if you're the sort of person that jumps straight into the search engine, you won't find anything. It's awful. So maybe we could consider, suggesting that an improved search engine would reduce the number of requests because they'd find the information for themselves if it's already published.
Yeah, I could definitely
consider that.
Yeah, I could definitely
thanks.
feed that back. Yeah.
And one brief question: did you mention an acronym SARS?
Yes, subject access requests. So these are requests from individuals for their own personal data
It's a
that we're
dreadful
holding
acronym
about them.
because that's a nasty disease from Asia. and this council is already using another one, MERS, which is a Middle East respiratory disease. And and I think we should try to avoid using an acronym that's got some unpleasant connotations. Just a little aside. Thank you.
Frank.
The question I was going to ask was that if two people are complaining about one particular incident, does that count as two complaints or one complaint?
It would depend on the circumstance and the relationship between the two individuals. So, for example, if they were a mother and a father complaining about a child's experiences, if they were together, I would ask them to consider putting the complaint in jointly. If they were separate, they may be having separate experiences, so I would accept them separately.
Yeah, I was probably looking more at a corporate complaint where both myself and a member of the Home Award wrote to the chief executive here to complain about something we objected to being in the foyer. Would that have been logged as a complaint? And would that have been two complaints or one complaint?
That in that situation, it would be two complaints because you're two individuals that are yes, you are complaining about the same thing, but arguably we have people complaining about the same potholes and the same flooding, so we would still accept them as separate complaints. If you're ever in doubt about where a complaint is going, please do email it to me or to the complaints department directly, and I can always let you know if a complaint's been formally logged. If you've not received an acknowledgement from my team, it's probably because it hasn't been logged with us.
So I'm guessing because we wrote to the chief executive, we have to settle on the chief executive's reply rather than think that the complaint was taken anywhere else.
Potentially the chief executive has responded to you and not put it through to us. I'm not sure. I would have to have a look at it. But yes, unless you've received a formal acknowledgement, because you would receive one from my team, you get an automated response and then you get an acknowledgement to your complaint from my team. So if you didn't receive that, then no, it hasn't been logged with my service.
Ben.
Just to go back to freedom of information, so it's great that you're encouraging departments to preemptively publish data, which forestalls one of the questions I was going to ask. Is that linked to the disclosure log? So if people have previously asked for some sort of information, would you then specifically encourage that department to publish that in future, maybe next year's version of it?
Yeah, so the disclosure log shows all the requests and responses that we've answered under the Act. So that's on a separate sort of website. So people can go on, search on that for key terms, dates, years, that sort of thing, and be able to find that information. We are talking more to service areas. So if we are getting a lot of frequent requests for information, we are encouraging them to publish more. We're also doing frequently asked questions on our Access to Information webpage. So we're sort of collating all the questions on a particular topic. If we're getting a lot, say, on, we've had a lot around sort of sustainability and climate change. So we've put those all together on a document, and that's on our webpage for someone to easily access and see possibly the answers to the questions they might also have on the same topic.
So we, in an informal chat we had before, we were sort of thinking of recommending what you've just described. So it's great to hear. I have a more nerdy specific question, which is on the disclosure log. It's not clear what license is applied to that data, and on the statistics of the FOI, it appears on the council's website. And the council's website has a default all rights reserved. Is it not good practice to publish data under OGL if it's possible to do so?
Yeah, it is published under OGL. It probably doesn't say on that web page. That's done through an external supplier, so I can speak with them about having it add it on there as well.
Yeah, I would, as someone who consumes a lot of public sector data, it's really nice if it's explicit that this data is under OGL.
Mark, did you have a question? No,
yes. It was a very small question, but a pet peeve of mine is when I send a request to somebody or a complaint to somebody, and they send me back saying, "Yes, sure, click on this link." You know, and you have to then go and find the document, and hope that you can download it, open the PDF, see the document. when you respond to a freedom of information or a complaint, do you give all the information in your response as well as the link, or just the link, and then they have to go and find it themselves? How do you usually handle that? Thank you.
From a complaints perspective, my expectation would be that all the information is in the response letter, as well as where you could find it in addition. As I was saying earlier, because we've made the complaints process more accessible, if a complainant felt they would benefit from a paper copy of a policy, for example, and they had let us know that, my expectation of my service would be that they would provide that.
From a freedom of information point of view, when we're responding, if it is available on our website, we are giving the actual web link, not just saying it's on the council's website, we give the direct link. If on that web page there's numerous documents, we'd be telling you exactly what documents it's in, possibly what page number the information you're looking in would be accessible to you.
I just wanted to go back. Robert, you mentioned this point about Google, the search on the council's website, and Claire, you mentioned you'll provide some feedback. I suppose I'm thinking you're now providing more information with frequently asked questions. So how can we be assured that that's kind of working, that when people ask questions that instead of having to write to you and you refer to the FAQs and tell them where to I was going to say where to go, you know what I mean? Do we have some assurance that people can ask those sort of questions and put them in the question line on the website, and that it'll immediately go to the FAQ, or will it go around the houses and answer lots of different questions on the route?
I think we're getting more into how the website operates, which isn't necessarily my remit, but we do feedback, and we are working with the communications team to ensure that information can be found. And I know that's something they're sort of looking at, sort of under those sort of programmes as well.
Yeah, I suppose maybe some of us on the committee should be undisclosed shoppers or whatever it is, and just have a look and see if the site is working any better. Robert, I don't know whether you want to follow up at all on that point about it?
I can do. I'm happy to do that, but I have referred this to the Chief Executive before, and he has assured me that something will be done, but whether he's able to, he's a busy man, whether he's got around to it or not, I don't know. I'm simply thinking for any area, the public ought to be able to access information more easily, and in particular in this freedom of information, it might reduce the number of requests. So that was why I asked if you knew what proportion was already public, but they didn't realise. So I'm happy to help if you want any help with this as a sort of a sort of a blind shopper or something, and see whether we can do something with that. Is that okay?
Yes.
Get back to me if you want any help with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, thanks.
And tell you the advocacy service. I think what we kind of like to use this forum as a way of almost advertising and giving other people information. If young people are listening, which I wouldn't have thought they would, but there might be some people who would be interested to know how this advocacy service works.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're not aware, I also manage the advocacy service. So Hear Me is the children's rights and advocacy service that sits in the local authority. About 4 years ago it was created originally, and we had one advocate who did a fantastic job, but one was obviously not enough for all the children that are looked after. 2 years ago it expanded to 4, and then in May 23 I doubled that again, and we have 8 advocates that now work for the local authority and provide a children's rights and advocacy service. At the same time as recruiting, we also looked at what we would be offering as a service. So a statutory right for children to receive advocacy is for our looked after children and our care leavers. We expanded that into children on child protection plans, children in need wanting to make a complaint, homeless children aged 16 and 17, unaccompanied asylum seeking children. And an area that we were all very passionate about was children both in our care and had left our care that were becoming parents for the first time, that may have their unborn or their newly born made subject to child protection. We felt that was an area that we should really be supporting and helping our children to navigate that, what is a very complicated process, because they are young themselves. The service, although sits in-house, is independent from children's services. We are completely child-led, so advocacy means that you can only work on the instruction of the child. So if a social worker is saying, I want to know what the child thinks about seeing mum, for example, unless the child wants to talk to us about that, we don't push that subject with them. Equally, unless it's a safeguarding concern, we don't share anything that the child doesn't want us to share. The purpose of the service is to make sure that the child's views, wishes and feelings are heard at their meetings, and that any decisions that are being made about them or their lives, that their voice is considered throughout that. The other side of the service is to ensure that any issues they might be having with the local authority, so that could be anything from their placement, for example, or wanting to raise a complaint, or if they feel like they're not being listened to. The advocate can raise that with the service on their behalf. Obviously, there are limitations. We've had, for example, requests for new social workers. We can request that for them, but we are also very realistic with a child that actually the allocated social worker might be the best person for them. So what can we do to support them to work with their social worker? So in that case, we might arrange a meeting with the young person, ourselves, the advocacy service, the social worker and the team manager to explain or try and work out how we can better create a better working relationship for them. We have recently just expanded into the non-instructed side of advocacy. So we're currently an instructed service. So as I say, children can instruct us on what they would like to do. I've been working with the Children with Disabilities team, and we have a noticeable number of children that aren't able to communicate with us in traditional forms. So 2 of the advocates within the service have just finished their non-instructed training. So we are going to be able to support those children who can't communicate with us verbally to ensure that their voice is also heard, because it's just as important as those that can instruct and can verbally communicate with us. So it's a really exciting time for the service. We are continuing to look to expand. There's a huge number of children that don't access our service that could access it, but we are showcasing continuously any events that are coming up. We are first to try and get in there. We've been going into schools, into youth groups. We've been contacting GPs, the health clinics, places like that, places that young people might want to learn about the service without going through their social worker, perhaps. We've also just developed our webpage, which has an online self-referral form, so children don't have to wait for school or social worker or mum and dad, for example, to put a referral in to us. They can put a referral in themselves. We've also made sure that we have a phone line that's that will now bounce to our administrator, myself, and 2 senior advocates. So the thought behind that is that it will always be answered. And I met with some of our children yesterday that actively access the service, and we had some really good feedback from all the changes that we've made.
Great, thank you very much. You're obviously passionately keen on it, so well done, that's great. And I think we may not see immediate benefits from it, but as the children grow up, I'm sure that it'll make a difference. Frank?
Yeah, it sounds absolutely fantastic, really. But my question is, do we also have children who are put into our county from other authorities? Do they have access to our advocacy? And the children that go from our county into other counties, do they have that same access as well?
So any child placed in the care of Herefordshire, no matter where they're living in the country, they have access to the Hear Me service. So we travel out of county to go and see our young people. Assuming they want to, sometimes they just want to talk to us on the phone. But if they want to see us in person, then yes, we go and see them. Children that are placed in Herefordshire should receive advocacy from the local authority provider. So every local authority should have an advocacy service. Recently, I've been made aware from 2 local authorities, they've been asking to spot purchase our service for children that have been placed here. So that's something we're looking at offering. We've taken it as a real compliment that other local authorities have recognised the work we're doing and that they'd like their children to access our service. So it's not something we actively offer, but it is something we're looking at. And as I say, we've taken that as a compliment. But all local authorities have a duty to ensure advocacy is available to their children, no matter where they're placed.
Great, thank you very much. So we note the report. I don't know whether we're saying anything about improving the website. We leave that with you continuing to niggle away at the chief executive. I think probably Robert. isn't it?
Normally Daniel has something to say about that, whether we should... No, you're not saying anything, okay. I don't mind, but you're going to take it on board anyway, so it doesn't have to go in as a formal request.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have a report in a year's time and see whether how much improvement there's been then.
Well, I will be testing it out from time to time, that's for sure. I'll, as I said before, I'll type in CEO in the search box and see if our CEO actually turns up in the hit list, which at the moment he doesn't. So you can try it if you like. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Great. Yes, Polly.
I just want to say, I don't know if this is the right place, but one of the biggest complaints I get as a ward councillor is the failure to answer the telephone. I just put that out there.
Yes, I phoned in this morning. There was a new message I hadn't heard before, and it did get through to you. I think Jenny, yours. Yeah. Continue to improve on that. I think. Okay. So thank you for that report. There's no recommendations, and we just thank you for coming to us and reporting. Thank you very much for all that information. You can stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish, or you can you can go. No. Well, so thank you very much. So item 8 is risk management. Notwithstanding Tilly's lack of interest in it, it's actually it is quite yes, it's an interesting topic. It's been around the houses a few times. Changes in responsibility, and Jessica, we now welcome you. I don't know whether Rachel, you're starting off with it, and then moving on to Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So a report was last brought to this committee in March of this year, and the purpose of this paper today is to provide an update on the ongoing work in respect of the activity that we've undertaken to review and develop the Council's approach to risk management. So over the summer months, we have had our risk management arrangements evaluated by our external risk management consultants. And following that exercise, we've incorporated their feedback and best practice into the updated draft risk management strategy that's attached at Appendix 1. We've still got some more work to do, and you'll note that the strategy that's attached at Appendix 1 has some gaps in the risk appetite matrix, in some of those corporate risks. And we plan to work through that through a series of CLT workshops in the coming months to populate those risks, identify the ones that are most relevant to the Council and the sectors that we operate in, and to define that risk appetite through that corporate leadership group. Thank you. Happy to take any questions, and I've got Jess here with me as well.
Yeah, I think our role is to make sure there's kind of the process in place, and it strikes me we're perhaps looking a bit more in depth, and I hesitate to say it, but a bit more professionally about how it's going to work, involving third parties, best practice, and so and I do like the way it's now presented. I do have one comment on the detail in a moment, but I think that Robert looks as if he's eager and ready to come up with
No, I was
questions.
just going to remind you that you wisely earlier suggested that the wording of our responsibility towards the risk register might want to be reconsidered.
Yeah. Okay. So if I can hopefully get the page numbers on this one. So I think it's page 35. As I say, generally, I think it's a really good document. So page 35, roles and responsibilities. I'm just a little bit, just wonder whether it could be clarified a little bit, made a bit clearer. So the Cabinet has the ultimate accountability for risk and related controlled environments. So, the responsibility ultimately rests with them. We might have a question about that in a moment. And then the Audit and Governance Committee approves the corporate risk register on a quarterly basis and monitors its progress. And then in the third box, the corporate leadership team monitors and reviews risks on the corporate risk register on a quarterly basis, ensuring adequate responses. So the corporate leadership team does it every 3 months. So I suppose we want the kind of assurance that, yes, they do actually make a serious look at it every 3 months. And then we look at it every 3 months as well. And we approve the register, and we just wonder whether the word approves is quite what we're supposed to be doing, because we're not going into the detail. We're just approving kind of the process, just making sure it's right. And so we wonder whether some slightly different wording might be appropriate in that section. Jessica, you're nodding your head. That's always good from an officer.
Yeah, so this is a draft. Happy to change the wording to so it's specifically to do with the process of how we manage and monitor the corporate risk register. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to the corporate leadership team, they will need to ensure on a regular basis that it captures the risks, but also the actions actually being undertaken. And because of that operational oversight that they will have strategically, they will be best placed to ensure that things are actually happening. And then we will report to this committee to provide you with reassurance, but also, like you say, I can change that wording to be specific to do with the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'd expect the report that comes to this committee to present the new corporate risk register and show any amendments and perhaps a briefing from the Chief Executive or you explaining what changes have been made and where it shows the direction of travel, the arrow is up, down, sideways or whatever. Hopefully we've got some going up. But we, a bit of analysis of that, so we have a brief. So it's the process, yes, but also a few comments. And I think as a committee, we had particular areas of concern where we didn't think things were being looked at. I think this suggests we ask the officers to attend the committee to look at that. I'm not sure whether that's necessarily the right process either. That's the end of that box. So should the committee have a concern about the scoring or detail of the risk, it might refer back to officers attending the committee. I think we might want to refer some things to scrutiny committees, to other committees if we have particular concerns. Because it's a kind of, the risk register, it's the Cabinet that's responsible. So is it the Cabinet member we should ask or scrutiny, but I'm not sure it's necessarily the officers mentioned in that box. So Jessica, with your experience with other councils, you might be able to work out what might be appropriate.
I think certainly in the department that leads the risk management within the council, the corporate centre, they can liaise with whoever is needed if you wish to. So, for instance, if you had any concerns about particular corporate risks, that corporate centre can then liaise with the directorates or the corporate directors to, for example, say cyber risk. We will speak to the IT director to ensure that that element is being looked at carefully, make sure that we are putting in mitigations in place against that risk. We can certainly do that in terms of sort of coordinating any concerns. But if it's specifically to monitor whether we're adhering to the processes, we may wish to speak to the scrutiny committee if you wish to. So there are depends on what it is that you want to refer, and then it will be whichever appropriate department accordingly.
Okay. And the schedules at the back have yet to be completed. When might it come back to this committee? I guess for the first quarterly review. Have you got something in mind, Rachel?
I think we intend to have those CLT workshops in the next couple of months. Whether we've got then a final strategy to incorporate the changes that you've discussed already before the end of the year, and then we can start that onward reporting quarterly process. So hopefully I would say we've got a committee date in October and then November. So if we can get something to you in November, I don't think we've got a meeting in December, have we?
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Any other questions? Ben?
I have two questions. The first is, this is obviously, I'm substituting, so this is a new area for me, but I went to the Constitution to look for where risk is delegated to the Cabinet, and I couldn't see it. Can someone point me to the correct, where I should be looking?
Not right now, I can't, but I will take that away and I will follow up and consult and confirm back to you where that responsibility lies. Yeah.
And my second question is much more prosaic, which is what is the plan to make sure that everybody in the organisation actually uses this risk management approach and is referring to this and not just old risk management approaches, things they did in other authorities, not doing anything at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step is to ensure that we have a strategy that we all approve of, and that CLT is in board. And then it will be a case of communicating the new strategy first and foremost. So ensuring that all the officers, regardless of which level of hierarchy you are, that you understand how important risk management is. So from the service business plans towards the the directorate leadership to CLT, that golden thread needs to we need to ensure that everyone understands what the new strategy is once it's been approved. And then in terms of monitoring it, of course, with all decisions that go to cabinet, there's a risk element in all those reports. They all come through to me at the moment. So in terms of ensuring risk is considered in all the decision making processes. And ensuring that there's adequate mitigations in place, as well as looking at those opportunities. It's not always just about the doom and gloom when it comes to risk. So ensuring that happens is all going to be coordinated with this corporate centre in terms of that risk management across the council. What we will also be ensuring is reviewing the performance management strategy and the framework, which will incorporate risk management as well. So when you're considering key performance indicators or the delivery plan, the element of risk needs to be considered in all those stages as well. So it's not just once a month necessarily, it will be ad hoc whenever it's needed, risk will be considered. And that golden thread, that culture will need to be improved, and it all comes through the communication. So we will ensure there's frequent communication that gets emailed across to all staff, but also workshops will take place to explain what risk management is, what the new strategy is, and how they can ensure that we consider this in their day-to-day work.
Thank you. I guess, again, it's not really my committee, but I imagine the committee will need to work out how it can be assured that it's being embedded, that's actually working.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I look at the risk comments at the end of cabinet reports, and I sometimes think, well, you know, it says mitigation, but this wording isn't about mitigation; it's about something else. So I will be looking forward, Jessica, to seeing now that you said it, they all come through you. So I'll be looking to some change, and you may occasionally get an email from me challenging that. That's really good, and that's not just cabinet decision making, is it? It's officers, it's directors. I'm looking forward to a big change in that area. And the other beef I've got a little bit was when we had cabinet member briefings. We should be looking at the risks in the particular cabinet member's area, but it would always come at the very end of the meeting, and it would be terribly rushed, and where people weren't, you know, they'd lost attention, and it might just slip off the agenda. So all power to you to make sure that there is proper time put in cabinet member briefings to look at risk, because that should influence the programme which they're working and how we're working forward as a council. So looking forward to your work, Jessica.
Thank you. I mean, we do often think about risk as being an isolated sort of process, but actually we often do risk management in our conversations on a day-to-day basis. So when we're considering the cost of something or a new initiative, what are the pros and cons, we are already considering risk management. And even though it might seem like an isolated process towards the end of a cabinet member briefing, for example, it actually probably a lot of the discussions already happened in that meeting in terms of that risk management, and it's just formalising it. But certainly all of the decisions that go through mod.gov comes through me in terms of ensuring there's consideration for risk in those reports.
Well, I'm impressed you're taking on that responsibility. I think that's well done to you. And yeah, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Jessica. I introduced myself earlier. The other place we've been seeing risks and risk management is by SWAP, internal auditors, and they have their own system. I was wondering, how are you coordinating with them? I mean, are you going to be feeding all your stuff through to them so that they can map everything, even if they're not auditing that particular aspect, because I believe at the moment their system is set up for their own use, for internal auditing. So they're only putting on the risks. So they might be putting the skeleton, the framework up there, but they won't have everything. So it might, it's easy for us to get misled and sort of think, oh, that's missing. What about this? What about that? Well, it's actually being considered as a risk. So how are you going to coordinate with them? What's your plans there?
So the initial plans are that, first of all, once the strategy is in place, I work very closely with SWAP, and we've had recent conversations about reviewing a corporate risk register. So once we have a strategy in place, the next step will be to decide what risks are going to be in the risk register, and then doing that benchmarking exercise to see how we compare with other local authorities. That work has already started, but certainly when it comes to the new corporate risk register, we need to review that and see, and then Audit will have a look and have those conversations with us to see whether we're on track in terms of our thinking in terms of corporate risk, making sure that the national risk register is also considered in that corporate risk level, and having those conversations on a regular basis. But in terms of a full formal audit of risk management within the council, we're looking at 9 to 12 months. So at this moment in time, we're early stages of creating this new strategy. The next step will be to refresh all our risk registers, embed that and ensure that the strategy is being implemented, and then we would like to be fully audited by SWAP to ensure that we are following and implementing what we say we are going to do, as opposed to it being great on paper but not great in reality. So we want to make sure that marries up.
Thank you. And the other thing that was mentioned was, I think it was by Ben as well, was the education throughout the entire corporation about the impact and the importance of risk, and that training would be offered. Now, this is one of my bugbears, is that we always offer training, but we don't necessarily see the take-up. And it would be nice to see that, to see evidence in the next report when we come back that, yes, 90% of the workforce in those departments have had it. Because in my experience, it's always been the leadership that maybe doesn't take it as seriously as the people on the end of the phones. So leadership has to set the example, and I would expect 100%, attendance on these training. Is that going to be your goal?
I don't see why not. For sure, what we can do is do e-learning modules. So that's something we haven't yet started the process on, but we can look at e-learning modules which can be mandatory to ensure that people are actually on board with the training. But that doesn't go far enough. E-learning can only do so much in terms of the training element. I want there to be interactive workshops where we say, take a case study, for example, how would we deal with risk management, and have those discussions where people can actually get immediate feedback on their thoughts and processes of ensuring risk management. So I don't want it just to be an online training and then that ends like a tick box exercise, exactly. So, but it does help in terms of making sure it's mandatory and making sure people actually do tick that box. So e-learning is an element, but I do want there to be workshops, and I would want there to be 100% attendance, of course. So it's all about communicating when those workshops are going to be happening, and not just be a one-off. It could be a regular thing that we could do on a quarterly basis where we offer these workshops and then ensure that there is enough take-up. But that can certainly be something we can feed back to let you know how we're getting on with that, and then make a judgment call what needs changing to ensure a higher attendance if it's looking low, and make that assessment at that time. But absolutely, we would be wanting 100% attendance.
Thank you very much, because it is important that we get assurance that people are not only having there's not just the availability of training, but they are taking it up and they are improving their skill set. And it's difficult to do, but it will be good to have that as a part of the assurance. Thank you.
Robert?
Yeah, my interest is in the risk appetite. And you have a risk appetite matrix where you look at 4 areas. I'm not quite sure whether we are using that is a good enough way to pitch the risk appetite at the right level, which is critical for our performance as a council. For example, you take awareness. you're aware of the risk. Tolerance for decisions. Well, how much tolerance? So is there a more refined process by which we can measure the appetite for risk and be more comfortable that it's pitched at the right level?
So in Appendix B, the risk appetite matrix, there will be examples in these specific risk areas of what risk could look like and how we would approach that risk. So that is a conversation that's yet to happen at CLT. So in a CLT workshop, that specific conversation about risk appetite will be discussed at that point. In those specific areas, say for example financial management, what our risk appetite is in terms of the environment, our economic growth, they'll be very different in terms of our approaches. But those are the specific examples. It will always be on a case-by-case basis when it comes to risk management. There's always going to be that element of, depending on what that risk is, we cannot from the outset or in advance necessarily, without all the information available to us, make a judgment call in the strategy itself. So this strategy gives us a framework to work with, and then further conversations needs to happen in order to be a bit more specific about risk appetite, but we can only go so far in this strategy because ultimately it will be on those specific circumstances in terms of how we assess risk and how we should approach it. And some of those risks will have to have those decisions taking place at corporate leadership level, at cabinet level in terms of how we take things forward. But certainly there needs to be further conversations to put more flesh on the bones when it comes to risk appetite. We recognise that.
Pleased to hear that. That answers my question fully. Thank you.
Ben?
Can I make one specific suggestion about the levels of risk appetite? There's a way of presenting things like this. So sort of naturally, if you present a list like that, it feels like a continuum, and that can make it harder for people to kind of judge which of the four levels it ought to be. And so just simply if you present like a risk continuum, but then you say averse is this bit and then there is a gap and then cautious is this bit, in terms of having those workshops, it can be easier to get people to kind of commit to one or the other. Whereas if they see it as a continuum, they often go, oh, well, it's somewhere between cautious and aware. That's
Noted, thank you.
Great, thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody, for that discussion. I mean, we note the report and the various actions that Jenny will have noted. Thank you, Jen. And Jessica, thank you very much for the presentation. And it's probably quite timely to do it at the same time as the auditors around, showing that we are seriously trying to improve our attitude to risk, and therefore making the auditor's job much easier in the future. So if you want to go, Jessica, whenever you want to. You can stay for the presentation if you wish, but thank you very much. Item 9 is the external audit findings report, and Grace, welcome. Glad you've made it, and hopefully you brought with you the final copy to be signed and completed. So Rachel, over to you first.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just before Grace from Grant Thornton talks us through the external audit findings report for 23-24, I just wanted to make a few points. But firstly, wanted to express a huge thank you to Grace, Kathy, and the rest of the audit team. I think it's fair to say that it gets harder every year. The challenge increases. We raise the bar every year. But I think we've worked really well together across our teams. I think we've built a really good relationship, and that certainly helps overcoming some of those obstacles and challenges. So a huge thank you for your hard work this year. So just wanted to draw your attention to the audit report. The findings are in the appendices. This year we published the accounts, the draft accounts, by the 31st of May deadline, and at that point it was noted by the auditors that the expenditure in our comprehensive income and expenditure statement exceeded the 500 million threshold, and that prompted a change in their audit classification of us as a major local audit. And as a result, there have been some additional procedures this year. In terms of increased sample sizes and audit scope, there have been additional layers of review by the Grant Thornton team, an additional partner review, and additional technical review. And because of that, there has been additional time and resource required on both sides. The results of that additional review are inevitably some changes in our disclosure and presentations in the accounts, and those are detailed in that audit findings report. Just to note that we've accepted all of the audit recommendations. There are no material errors found through their testing, and where recommendations have been made and we've accepted those, we've identified an action plan to remedy, or where appropriate, we've corrected straight away. And with that, I'll hand over to Grace to talk you through the findings.
Thank you. Yeah, so firstly, thank you for being willing to postpone this meeting. It did enable us to close down a number of areas and give you a more completed picture today. And thank you for the summary as well, Rachel. So, yeah, the main thing to note is the opinion that we plan to give is unmodified. So our opinion is included later in the agenda. That is subject to a couple of items that are still outstanding. I can give you a bit of a verbal update on those. They're on page 4 of the report. So we've had the response from the external valuer now, and that work has been completed and is now subject to review. I've been working closely with the engagement lead of the pension fund audit, and she's assured me we will get the IS 19 letter tomorrow, which should enable us to do that work and close that down before the weekend. And Cathy and I submitted the hot review and ethics process yesterday to our colleagues, and we're just waiting for final sign-off on that. So we are very close. There's still quite a bit to review on the file, but Cathy and I are working through that along with the review partner to get that done in a timely manner. Our aim is to sign on Monday, which is the statutory deadline. Rachel's taken the words out of my mouth, really. I was going to say the ask of audit gets more and more each year, and I just wanted to thank Rachel, Judith and the team for their collaboration with us, especially over the last couple of weeks where we have been pretty much having daily calls trying to move things on to make sure we meet that deadline. So just wanted to echo those thanks as well. I do appreciate the report came through quite late, so I'll hand over to Cathy to go through more of the detail on some of those amendments and recommendations in the appendix.
Thank you, Grace. So I'm just going to talk you through some of the detail on the recommendations that we've made and some of the errors that we've found and what we've done about those. So I'm just looking at Appendix B at the moment, if you want to have the same page open. So the first recommendation that we have made is around the journals process. So we noted that for journals which fall below £2 million in total or have a single line that's less than £250,000, there isn't a sort of formal approval process. We also noted one instance where a journal below that threshold had been requested to be posted and supporting evidence hadn't been provided, and that journal was still posted into the ledger. We took that as a risk, and we have reflected that in our testing. So we targeted our testing at journals that fell just below the £250,000 limit, noting that there was a risk that this could be exploited to post multiple journals just below that limit to essentially get an effect above that amount. We didn't find anything of that nature at all from our testing. So we're quite comfortable that there hasn't been any impact from this, and we've just made a recommendation that management consider reviewing maybe a sample of those that fall below the limit, or implementing some additional controls, or consider how they're doing that. So that's that first recommendation. The second recommendation is also about journals, but this time about journals that fall above that limit. So for those journals that are subject to review and authorization, we noted that the authorization is evidenced only in an Excel document. So our recommendation is that evidence of that authorization should ideally be a signature or some kind of hard copy proof that authorization is happening. We again, we picked our sample. We could see that the authorization in that Excel document was present, but there's just a question as to whether that Excel document is appropriate audit evidence of authorization. So that's the second one. The third is also again about journals. We noted one instance where, so we do a check that the people who have posted journals, that they haven't posted journals after they left the organization, or that they haven't posted journals before they joined the organization. And in one case, we noted an individual who had continued posting journals after they had left. However, having discussed that with the finance team, we understand that it's not as it sounds. It's simply that that user's account was set up to post some automatic journals, interface journals, and so it appears that they're posting even though they're not genuinely posting. So we know that the finance team are following that up with their IT team to try and get that rectified, which is why you'll see that shown as a low risk. We also did do a check to see that the journals that were posted by that user did meet the explanation that we were provided, and that was the case, so we're quite comfortable. The next recommendation, the fourth one, is on page 32. This is to do with accruals. So we noted a number of instances from various bits of our testing where accruals were not necessarily always being made. We noted this both in expenditure and in income. We also noted it at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, and in some cases it meant that expenditure was overstated, in some cases it was understated. And so there's no pattern that we could see. There was no risk to us that we felt management was using this to manipulate the accounts in any way. There was no pattern of that nature whatsoever. So we're quite comfortable that it's simply that accruals concept is not always being implemented, but not being used to manipulate the accounts in any way. We have noted some errors relating to this, and you can find those in Appendix D. They are not material, and so there's not been an adjustment made for them. The final recommendation here is to do with the valuation of property, plant and equipment. One of the pieces of data that the valuer will use when they are doing the valuation of other land and building assets is the floor area of an asset, and the data for that floor area is stored in a system. When we asked for evidence to support the data that was held in that system, we found a number of instances where the data wasn't quite right. Again, similar to the accruals, some of them were under, some of them were over, and we saw no pattern. So it doesn't appear to us that there's any indication that management's using this to inflate the valuations or reduce the valuations in any way. There's no pattern amongst that. Again, also, it wasn't material, but you'll see that again in Appendix D. The only other error that we noted that has been adjusted is an £8.4 million error in the presentation of grants received in advance. We haven't found an issue with the figure itself. It is correct as per the work that we have done, but it was mispresented. And so you'll see that in Appendix D as well on page 35. So those were the main things I wanted to talk through, but happy to take any questions on any of that.
Great. Shall we carry on with this section? Is that the best thing to do? Yes, we will. So, Cathy, thank you. I was going to start off with various questions on all those things you've addressed. So actually, you've taken what I was going to say, taken it away completely. So I don't have those questions anymore. So, we've seen the annual accounts before. We've seen the statements before. This is the new document, as far as I'm concerned. This is the bit which I think, as an audit committee, we should be looking at and be particularly interested, particularly with the short time period we've got. So thank you for addressing my my questions before I ask them. I don't know if anybody else has any questions. Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. You said about evidence for signing off things and people writing a signature. Is that going to happen in the digital world now? I mean, how do other councils provide evidence that the £2 million authorisation?
So it is different at different places, and it sometimes depends on what accounting software you've got. So in some cases, the accounting software itself will not allow a journal to be posted unless it's been approved by an appropriate approver. Unfortunately, I don't think that is something that you have the option of in your system. As a sort of easy solution, I would suggest either just signing a piece of paper to say that it's been done and scanning that as a copy, or even just emailing the evidence and having that retained as evidence that an appropriate person has approved the journal.
Anybody else? Robert.
Yes, thanks very much. I was going to talk about the just to really lay down a marker. I think you're obliged to do it anyway. But this valuation situation, we have valuations done of property that we can never dispose of, and it costs us money. And then we are asked for extra verification to prove that the length of a wall is actually as said on something that will make no difference to us in the future because we can never dispose of it. And the second part of that was pretty laid down, but an actual question related. You get a valuation from us and you have a backup valuation. Who wins?
Sorry, Catherine.
Okay. So we don't have the assets valued ourselves. So yourselves as the council will employ an external valuer to perform the valuation of the assets. We will, as auditors, review the valuations that have been performed and the assumptions that have been made and the data inputs that have been used by the valuer. We will verify that the data that's been used has been correct, and then we'll do a review of the assumptions to assess whether they're reasonable assumptions or not. And we will, in some instances, take advice from an external valuer ourselves as our expert to say whether or not those assumptions are reasonable. But we don't do, it's not like we're doing a full revaluation again ourselves.
Any more? Yeah, Frank.
So just looking at page 37 where you talked about the 8.4 million that had been misstated at 31st of March 2024. I see there were other in the previous 2 Marches as well. Just for my own thoughts, and if somebody came to me and said that the council, they misstate amounts and the 8.4 million, what is the simple answer? Because I'm sure I know it's all been put right, but the simple answer to the doorstep inquiry?
So it's a presentation error. So in the draft accounts that were presented to you back in May, June, that we published in May, on the balance sheet there was a figure called short-term creditors for 65 million. Within that, the 8.4 million was within that. In the revised accounts that are presented to you today, we've got a separate line underneath it that just takes that 8.4 million out and shows it separately. So it wasn't an error; it was already there, and we've just taken it out and presented it separately in the final statements.
Robert?
Well, I just wanted to say one last thing and just note for the record that we're very proud of our finance department and the work they've done to make this easier for this committee, because it's a very complex subject, especially for us laymen. And thank you and your team for doing so much on this and working well with the auditors to make it all come clear, and we can get our audited accounts almost certainly on time. It's great. Thank you so much. I'd like that recorded for our records.
Yeah, I think we all echo that. Could I just ask one final question, really something which I'm sure Aubrey would be asking if he was here, and it's with my background of being a pension fund trustee of a number of final salary pension schemes. So I don't think we had this information last time. So the net pension liability on page 19 of the public pack, I think it's 17 of yours, and the net pension liability is a mere 8.7 million, as against 24 million the previous year. So this shows a significant improvement in the pension scheme, and you do some work on this, and you've presumably had it all verified. I'm not sure, Rachel, which kind of area of the council, which from a committee perspective looks at the pension scheme, but you know, just looking at those figures on the surface look very helpful, because I know how pension liabilities can take down businesses and can have a significant impact. Rachel.
So in terms of that assurance, it's the Worcestershire Pension Fund, of which we are an employer member. So I sit on the pension board, along with which is chaired by Councillor Phillips. There's also a pensions investment subcommittee, and there's representation from Herefordshire Council members, Herefordshire Council officers, to provide that check and challenge, and to present back that assurance. And then separately, the accounts of the pension fund are subject to an entirely separate external audit that's carried out by a different Grant Thornton team.
Excellent, thank you very much. I won't repeat the words of Robert, but we do thank you, and I'm hoping on Monday we'll have some great news, and we'll put the flags out. Actually, there is a flag out today, I think. I'm not quite sure why, but we'll put the flags out, and so thank you. Might we be the first at Grant Thornton, do I hear, possibly to...
You'll definitely be one of the first, yeah. I don't think many are going to get over the line before the end of September. I can only control this one, so if somebody beats me to it.
Yes, great, good, thank you very much. So I guess we've received the report, and just delighted with the way things have gone. Thank you very much. Item 10 is the annual governance statement. I think this can be quite quick. Rachel, we saw this as an earlier meeting. Haven't been any significant changes, I don't think. So I'll leave it to you to just give us a summary, please.
So this was last presented at the June committee. You made a couple of recommendations in respect of language. I think one of those was that we changed the reference to a positive risk. We took that feedback on board and we've made that change, and we've also amended the spelling error. And those changes have been submitted to Grant Thornton. They've reviewed and checked those, and that audit, that annual governance statement is checked by them as part of their audit work for consistency, and to consider that control framework and the governance arrangements.
Great, thank you very much. Do we need any particular resolution for this one? Yeah. Sorry. Yes, Mark. Yeah.
Thank you. When is this being published for public use on the?
So it's in the public domain already. We have a public inspection period, and that was from the 1st of June through to the 12th of July, where any member of the public can come and ask a question. It will be published as part of the audited statement, and then it remains on the council's website. A further update on the actions we've highlighted, areas for improvement, will be brought back to this committee twice through the year.
Thank you very much. So I think we must formally adopt this governance statement and agree that it properly reflects the risk environment the council is operating in, and that actions identified represent an appropriate response. And I think separately you're saying that we have an agenda item later on in the year to look at the action plans to see how things have progressed during the year. So all those in favour, show of hands. Thank you very much. Item 11, the statement of accounts, very similar. Rachel, we've seen these before. Changes have been highlighted in the audit report. Do you want to just summarise it for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So again, the statement of the draft accounts were presented to you as a committee in June. Those accounts are the set that was subject to audit by Grant Thornton. Where they've made recommendations and we've adjusted for those, we've presented a final set of accounts to the auditors, and they've confirmed that all of those required changes have been made, and that's the final set that are presented to you today. Alongside that, we present the letter of representation, and that's for review and noting and approval as well.
Okay. So the officers, I personally, and Rachel, you've read through the letter of representation, and you're happy with all of that. I've read through it. I'm not aware of any issues that we need to disclose.
No.
Happy with all that. And I think quite interestingly, I saw that the one adjustment which we follow a different policy from the other one that's highlighted in the letter of representation, which I think is a helpful thing to do. Okay. Does anybody have any questions, comments? No? Okay, so we need to resolve to, I'm not sure we actually approve the accounts, do we, as a committee? We do approve the accounts, of course, and approve my signing them and also signing the letter of representation. So if I propose that, yes, the accounts be approved, then I sign as appropriate. All in favour? Thank you very much. Item 12, External Auditor's Annual Report. We've had this for a little bit longer than the other items. So I think we can sort of dive into this again, Rachel. And Neil, you're here to help us to understand the value for money aspect, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not going to steal any of Neil's thunder in taking you through the report. But again, I just wanted to express my thanks to Neil and the work that he's done. In recent years, we haven't had this report at this point in the year, so it's really great to have this alongside the audited accounts, because that concludes the audit process for 23-24 for us. So the value for money report, the annual auditor's report, is a review of the arrangements that we have in place under 3 key themes. That's financial sustainability, governance, and the 3 E's, which are economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in our use of resources. The report outlines against each of those criteria the recommendations made and any weaknesses identified in those arrangements. What I'd like to draw your attention to for this year is an additional piece of work done as part of this exercise by Grant Thornton to look at our arrangements in the Children and Young People Directorate in terms of our finances. And I'm really pleased that review confirmed that there are good arrangements in place, that we've got a realistic and robust budget set for the Children and Young People Directorate. And we've seen that through some of the budget monitoring that's gone to Cabinet this morning. And with that, I'll hand over to Neil to take you through the findings.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel. I think, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I guess, the first thing is to thank you, Rachel, for all that. I mean, as you say, it's great to have the report at this point. I think it's gone from May a couple of years ago to January to now. I'm conscious that you got 2 jobs and you're trying to do this. So I appreciate all your timely responses and your support in getting the work done. Conscious, Chair, that we've got a couple of guest members, so it might just be helpful for me to explain how our work that we've done here fits with the work that Kathy's just talked about. So the work that all external public sector audit firms do is determined by the National Audit Office. They produce a code of audit practice every 5 years, which is approved by Parliament. What that means is that whoever your external auditor is, and whichever part of the country you are in, and whether you're an NHS body or a local government body, the scope of the work is essentially the same. Rachel's talked about the 3 areas that the National Audit Office sets out. Within each of those 3 areas, they set between 4 and 5 what you might call exam questions or key lines of inquiry that all of those audit firms have to answer. And you'll see that in our report. We've got it in like a grid format this year for each of those questions. We've got the work that we did and a red, amber, green rating against them. Where the audit firms do have some discretion is in the extent and scope of the work that we do. So Grant Thornton has developed a methodology which is applied across the country, which for each of those exam questions requires us to answer a number of questions. In some instances, for example, around budget setting, there might only be one question. In others, there might be 7 or 8. And then if we find any risks, we can go into it into a little bit more detail. What we like to do at Grant Thornton is to try and add a little bit more value as well. So some of the improvement recommendations that you've got in there, that's not required by the Code of Audit Practice. That's something that Grant Thornton does to try and add value. And Rachel's taken on board some of the comments we've made about waiver reporting, where we've seen in other parts of the country where we felt you could strengthen those arrangements, and so we sort of highlight best practice just to try and sort of get that improvement going. So overall, a very positive report in those 3 areas. The one area which you will see, which is red, where we've got the key recommendation, is with children's services. What we try to reflect in the report is the direction of travel is positive. Rachel's already talked about some of the finances and things that you've got in place, which we found to be robust. We met with Tina as your new Director of Children's Services, and she talked us through the sort of new broom approach, if you like, and refocusing the work. So obviously that's going to take time to bed in and to develop. But we were reassured by what we found. We can't change the Ofsted recommendation or their grading until they come back and revisit it, which might be next year or the year after. So obviously, as they are the regulator, it's really very difficult for us when they're saying those services are inadequate until they're re-inspected. It's very difficult for us to say actually it's fine, which is why it stays as that sort of red rating. That's a consistent approach that we take across the country. So we're not sort of bullying you or victimising you in any way. That's just the approach that the firm takes. But hopefully you can see that there's a positive direction of travel there. In terms of the finances, Councillor Cornway asked earlier on about children in a different topic about children relocating to Herefordshire and things. And what you see increasingly is that being a real challenge for councils and their ability to forecast, which is why the budget in children's social care is particularly volatile. A child might be in council care in a London borough, for example. Parents decide it would be appropriate to move to a leafy, greener, more pleasant situation where you get less pollution and all those sorts of things. So they decide they're going to move here. Some of those placements can be £20,000 a week. So today your budget is fine. Monday you've got £1 million problem because someone's moved to your area and you've got to pay for it. You're responsible. So you can't forecast those. Those sorts of things are impossible really, because you simply don't know who's going to be moving into your area until they knock on your front door. It's a problem for a lot of councils, particularly those in more pleasant areas to live, because obviously people are quite keen to go and take their children to live somewhere that's better for them. We also see challenges for councils with adult social care. A little bit easier to predict, but what we're now seeing and what your council is experiencing is people who previously have been in care homes, who've been self-funding, so they've been paying the cost of the care home themselves. Once their assets fall below £23,000, then they are no longer self-funders. So they are then their care home fees are basically paid by the council, essentially. For some of those people, you can move them, but for others, it's not appropriate. So then the council picks up the cost of that. Those placements are a lot less than children's placements. So you might be between £600 and £800 a week, for example. I was working on one council where between setting their budget in February and April, they had 25 people who were self-funders suddenly became not self-funders. So again, that's a several £1 million a year problem that you wouldn't really be able to predict. The other area that we're seeing, which you're a little bit immune to, but I think starting to see some of the pressures keep creeping through, is homelessness. That's started to become a major problem, particularly in the southeast and in London, and we're starting to see that moving up through the country, really, because obviously the council has a duty to ensure that people have a place to live. So that's becoming an increasing problem in terms of the capacity that the councils have and the need to rely on private sector landlords to support and house those people. So At the moment, you've got good arrangements in place there, and I know you've got quite a lot of schemes and things to get people off the streets and those sorts of things, but that's something that I know Rachel and her team are sort of acutely aware of. The final area around finances that I wanted to talk about, which we have made an improvement recommendation around, is the dedicated schools grants. And this is a particular problem in a lot of councils, particularly in what you call the high needs block, where children need sort of support within the school and those sorts of things for it. So that, you know, some of them might have one-to-one care, so they're in a mainstream school, which is the right thing to do for them, but they might have someone with them all the time as a teaching assistant or something like that. Those things can be really expensive, and we're seeing that as an increasing problem as well. It hasn't been a problem here in the past, but you'll have seen from the accounts and from our report that it's an increasing problem, and your council, your officers are forecasting for that to continue to be a challenge. What they are doing, and we've put it in the report, is they're engaging with the schools forum, trying to build capacity in terms of getting more places for children, which obviously, if it's an in-house facility, is cheaper. So that's just something to keep on the radar, I guess, and to watch when you're getting your reports coming through about, you know, try and have a look at that in particular, to see where that direction of travel is going, because that is a major problem for a lot of councils. So that's the finances. The finances bit, which was the bit I wanted to spend longest talking about. You'll see that there's no red areas with there. We made a few improvement recommendations, but what we found was your budget setting processes are robust. The assumptions that your officers make when setting the budget is reasonable. You've got good financial reporting processes in place, but there's just these sort of risk areas that you kind of need to keep an eye on. I'll spend less time talking about the governance and things, but again, we've provided some areas there where we think, you know, there's an opportunity to get better. We've talked about risk earlier today. We've made a recommendation around risk as well, which I think is going to be incorporated into the work that we talked about earlier. In our view, best practice is for the risk register to also include the corporate objective that it relates to. So you can see if this risk happened, it might mean that we wouldn't be able to achieve this objective that we've set ourselves. So that's something that we see, and we've just fed that in as an area for you know, for officers to think about whether they'd like that to be an improvement area. We've talked about waivers as well, where it's necessary to sort of circumvent your normal procurement process in terms of tenders. It happens from time to time. It's just a matter of recording that. Best practice, really, in our opinion, is for that to come to this committee. Ideally in advance, but usually it tends to be afterwards, just so members have got a handle on what's happening there, just so you can keep a lid on it, make sure it's not happening too frequently. We didn't see that as a risk, but it's just something that we see as best practice, so we flagged that for you. The last bit is the 3 E's bit, where we're looking at things like procurement arrangements, your partnership arrangements, your performance management reporting, and all those sorts of things. And we found some really good evidence there as well, actually, for the work that you're doing, particularly with the hospital and things, and you're trying to build a new facility there for an education block, those sorts of things. We know you work quite well with them. It's not always easy working with the NHS, because sometimes you've got different priorities. Some of those adults who were moving from care homes, there's always a bit of a risk about you know, is the council going to pay, or is the health service going to pay? So yeah, there's a little bit of friction, but what we found was actually those arrangements are pretty good. The only area that is red in that 3 E's bit is, as I said at the start, about children's services, and that's we've covered that, so I won't go through that anymore. We raised a number of improvement recommendations. It's in the action plan at the back. Officers have responded really positively to those and taken those on board. I wasn't proposing to go through them because you've had the report for a while to be able to look at, but very happy to talk about any of those or anything else which you might wish. But I want you to take away the message that it's a positive report. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? Frank? And then Polly.
Yeah, a great report, and I'm really encouraged by lots of what you shared. So there must be a process in which you've presented us with this auditor's report. we hear what you're saying about people could come into the area. How does that get fed through to the budget and everybody else? Because we can accept that as an audit and governance committee, what you've shared, but does all this get fed through so that we're actually officers and councillors are working towards what you've told us and being very aware of it? I'm concerned that we can hear that but not do anything about it. But there are people. I'm going to assume that there are people that will do something about it.
Yeah, I can take that. So all of the corporate leadership team have seen this report, and obviously they'll pay special attention to the areas that are within their individual directorates. Directorate leadership teams can then discuss these reports, and specifically from a finance perspective, I'll be discussing each of these recommendations with my teams, those responsible for engaging with budget holders, with service leads as part of the budget setting process, and I personally will ensure that we consider all of these recommendations as part of that 25-26. Yep, that's on me. In terms of the recommendations as well, these will be managed. Grant Thornton will follow them up in future years, and internal audit as part of their management of our audit recommendations as that whole piece will continue to liaise with us and understand what actions we've put in place. And you're absolutely right that some of these have a direct impact on the revenue budget, our forecasting, and we consider that as just part of general financial management arrangements across the council.
All up here and on to you.
Polly.
Just a couple of facts which you might find interesting. I inquired yesterday from a colleague who deals with it. We only have two tier 4, which is the highest children's placement costs. We only currently have 2. That's not to say a third one will not come along tomorrow, but there are currently only 2. And as for the continuing care, NHS social care versus the NHS continuing care, this is a battle I've had over the years over this. I have to say that we now have a very robust team in to make sure that the NHS don't weasel out of trying to take over the things that they should do, which they will do given any relaxation in pressure at all. I just thought people would like to know that we are doing our very best in both those fields.
Thank you, Polly. Information we gather sort of on the ground is really helpful, I think.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
I seem to be dealing with both corporate parenting and health and well-being at the moment. So
Great.
I've got both sides of it.
Thank you. Robert.
Yes, I'd like to add a bit of information to that. First of all, the homelessness and the risks of sudden increases or whatever. The Cabinet is well aware of that, and I believe they recently approved a sum of money to be spent on investing in property so that we can reduce our recurrent expenditure by using some capital money. I guess Rachel can confirm that there is a sum of money that's been agreed on this so that we are a little better prepared for that eventuality. Before you answer, and the other thing is that the costs of care are well known and have been repeatedly discussed here, and especially the unexpected ones. If an SEN child turns up, you could be into £1 million a year or more just like that, and you can't predict when it's going to happen. But the problem with this, and also the fact that one child in care costs an average nationally of £6,000 a week, the trouble is it's a national problem. The national landscape on which we are working, and I hope that your report reflects, or certainly will be reflected, that some of this is certainly a risk, but it's not a risk that we can manage. Because if the national landscape says it's going to cost £6,000 a week for a child in care, we are not in a position, don't have the power to do anything about that. Central government does. They might be able to do something, but we don't. And I hope that that's reflected in the auditor's understanding of this situation.
Thank you, Robert. Polly?
Come back again too on the homelessness issue, because several houses have been bought in. Do you want me to name the street? I could even tell you the road.
No, I don't think we need to
You
go
don't
into that
really need
detail,
to know.
Polly.
Just to tell you, it's in my ward to accommodate to provide suitable accommodation for homeless people.
Thank you, Polly. Just a couple of observations, if I may. There's a recommendation 3, which is about the tendering, where you suggest quarterly reporting, and I think in your verbal report, I got the impression you felt annual might be enough. Rachel, what's the suggestion, and what should be minuted? It's improvement recommendation 3, and which is on page 83 of the supplemental.
And I think it's relevant just to point out that we do monitor those waivers. We just don't have a mechanism for reporting them through to this committee. I think if I can go away and discuss with the team and understand the volume and see what might be an appropriate frequency and come back to you with that to make sure that we're not bringing something that has a list of 4 times a year. So if I can take that away, Chair.
Yeah, I suppose just it's a recommendation, and so I think Neil suggested it once a year or something like that in his verbal report. But okay, well, so that's an action to bring back. The other one is on the funding, the need, what is it? The dedicated schools grant. So I was on a call this morning with the CNN, and the chair or president or whatever of the Society of County Treasurers was on the call. And obviously a lot of concern about how that's going to be dealt with in the future. But one kind of consequence that they were saying, because this is real money that goes out of the council doesn't have it in its bank account anymore. So there is a loss, which is the loss of income. And they were saying that they were estimating it something like £5 million a year for the average council. Now for us, it's going to be much less than that, I think, Rachel, because we're fortunately at the bottom end, but it's an unintended consequence of this that some revenue which we will be expecting will no longer be coming in. Neil, I don't know whether you want to comment on that, or Rachel.
Chair, thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a national problem, and the point that you make about it, although you're able to sort of carry it as a sort of the mechanism allows you to carry it as a negative reserve at the moment through rather than having to sort of find the funding in year as such through council tax. But you're right that it is money that the council is having to pay out. So it is that's why we wanted to flag it, really, to be honest, because you're right that this council is certainly at the lower end of the deficits that we see, but it is obviously increasing, and I think it went from 1 million to 6 million, and you're forecasting sort of for it to get worse again. So when you say an average of 5 million, I mean you're sort of about there, aren't you, with it, really? So it is a challenge.
Well, I think for Kent it was 100 million, the deficit. Yeah. So the interest of it's money which is not in their bank anymore. So,
I wanted, if I may as well, just to Councillor Highfield there about the £6,000 a week average, and I think in my presentation I spoke about some cases which were 20. So what we're seeing in some councils is trying to increase the in-house provision that they've got, because those figures that you talked about, you're absolutely right. You have no control over those, because that's the market rate that the private sector providers are charging. So we are increasingly seeing councils trying to develop in the same way that Councillor Andrews has talked about the homeless housing option. You're seeing councils increasingly trying to do that. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously, as you can imagine, the council is able to do it at a lot lower rate than some of the figures that you're aware of. So just something to sort of bear in mind, really.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know it's been talked about. Why this not come on? The whole situation is a national scandal, because the worst thing about this is that the £6,000 a week, the people who are actually caring for those children will be on minimum wage. You can guarantee it. So, and we have had figures about the profit margins of the big companies that dominate this industry, and they're outrageous. But we can't do anything about that. This central government should do something about this. I'm a Tory. I don't really like too much government interference, but here's an area where regulation is needed, just as it was with the water companies. Free enterprise is all very well, but you've got to do it within a regulatory framework that makes it work efficiently, and currently it is not. So that was just not something you can do about it, but I have my little blow off about it.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Rachel, you, yeah.
I just wanted to provide some assurance over that kind of budget setting process, and one of the key priorities and drivers in setting the budget is making sure that we've got sufficient funds to deliver the priorities of the council plan. But we're joining that up with the capital programme and making sure that we are considering those revenue pressures to understand how we can use those funds, the resources, the assets, etc., to contain and mitigate and minimise those current financial pressures, but also the ones that we know are coming down the road.
Yeah, when in the previous administration, we did have issues with huge bills suddenly appearing, and some of the unfortunate bits were when children got to the age of 18 and they moved from these expensive placements within children's services, and they then moved into adults, and there was no provision in the budget for the cost in the adult service. But I think the communication has improved enormously between those two departments. So make sure, when there is a transfer, one department is just saying, well, it's now your problem. I think there's a lot more joined up thinking within the council, I'm pleased to say. So the external audit report, we've noted it. Thank you very much. A couple of action points arising. No more to say, really. Thank you. And we'll move on to the work programme. It's 4:10. So I don't know whether you want to hang around just for a few minutes. Well, okay, thank you, Grace. So the work programme here. Jen, do you want to comment on anything that's come out, moved?
The only thing that had been brought forward to today's meeting was the External Auditor's annual report, which came 2 meetings early. Otherwise, there's been no change. It's just if the committee want to make any amendments, additions, etc.
So the next time we'll be seeing Jessica is, was it 10th of June, did you say? Corporate risk registers.
That can be revised, Councillor Woodall, as per the meeting today.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Okay, and look, thanks for presenting this in such a nice, readable form. That's great, very helpful.
Can I just ask,
Robert, yeah.
Not on the record, but the timing is, we normally meet a bit earlier, it's down to 2 p.m. Is that the official meeting start time?
Yeah, 2 o'clock is when we normally.
Routinely meet half an hour earlier, or?
We normally meet at 1 o'clock for the pre-meeting. Yeah, so it's 1 o'clock and then 2 o'clock for the meeting. So you have a little break between. Yes, yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, Polly, thank you for your contributions, and you are involved, and Ben can't excuse himself completely because he used to be on the committee, so he knows a lot about it, and so some great substitutions. Thank you, Ben, for your contribution, and Polly. Okay, well, can I ask for the live stream to be just on his way? Okay.